Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're peeling back the layers on something pretty fundamental in finance, but maybe not always fully understood. Audit working papers.
That's right.
You hear about the big reports, the scrutiny, but how do auditors actually back up what they say? It's not just a signature, is it? There's this whole trail behind it.
Absolutely. A whole documented process.
And understanding that is, well, it's key to understanding trust in finance. So our mission today is to figure out what these papers are, why they're so crucial, and what makes them good, reliable papers.
And we're drawing our insights from this piece called auditworkingpapers.pdf.
Exactly.
And hopefully by the end of this chat, you'll really get a feel for the backbone of an audit. Maybe even appreciate the sheer diligence involved.
Yeah, that diligence. Okay, so let's kick things off. What exactly are these audit working papers? What's their main job?
Well, basically, they're the auditor's core records. Think of them as the evidence file for everything they do. ISA 230, that's an international standard on auditing, kind of the rule book says their purpose is twofold.
Two main things.
Yeah. First, provide a solid record, sufficient and appropriate, to back up the auditor's final report.
Right, the basis for the opinion.
Exactly. And second, they need to serve as actual evidence that the audit was planned right, performed right, all according to those ISAs and any relevant laws.
That sounds like a heavy lift, a big responsibility.
It really is.
And what's interesting, the source mentions this idea that getting these papers right can actually protect the auditor from, and I quote, unwelcome and unnecessary litigation.
Yes, that's a really practical point. It highlights that these aren't just, bureaucratic hoops to jump through.
Not just ticking boxes.
No, they're a critical shield. If something goes wrong later, like a misstatement or fraud claim comes up.
Which happens.
It does. And these papers are often the very first thing regulators or courts will look at. They have to prove the auditor did their job properly. It's their defense.
Wow. So the stakes are incredibly high for the auditor themselves.
Very high. It's a powerful reason to be meticulous.
Okay, speaking of meticulousness, there's this concept mentioned, the stranger test. The idea that papers must be clear enough for an experienced auditor with no prior connection to understand.
Ah, yes, the stranger test. It's fundamental to audit quality.
What does that actually mean in practice? What should this hypothetical stranger be able to figure out?
Well, this external auditor coming in cold needs to grasp a few key things just from the papers.
Like what?
The nature, the timing, the extent of all the audit procedures done, what was done, when, and how much testing occurred.
Okay, the scope.
Right. Then the results, what did those procedures find? What evidence was gathered?
Makes sense.
And finally, any significant issues or matters that came up during the audit, the conclusions the auditor reached on those matters, and the important judgments they made to get to those conclusions.
Yeah, level of clarity sounds, intense.
Yeah.
Almost impossible sometimes.
It's a high standard.
But then the source also warns against unnecessary working papers or just copying loads of the client's records.
Right.
So extreme clarity, but don't overdo it. How do they find that balance?
Yeah, it's a real judgment call. It's about balancing being thorough with being efficient. The guidance says you don't need to document every single tiny thing you thought about.
Okay.
You focus on papers that serve a real purpose, either supporting the final report or providing necessary info. The key is value. Does this paper add value or is it just clutter?
Got it. Be comprehensive, but not redundant.
Exactly. And only prepare papers yourself if it's not practical for the client staff to do it, though we'll get to client papers later.
Okay, so we know what they are, who needs to understand them. Let's zoom in a bit. If these papers are the bedrock of trust, what specific details must be in there? What makes them accurate and accountable?
Okay, for that rigor, the standards are quite specific. You need to record the identifying characteristics of what you tested, meaning the specific invoice numbers or the contract reference or the exact items from a list you sample. You need to know precisely what was examined.
Okay, traceability.
Exactly. Then, who did the work and the date it was completed? Accountability.
Right.
And just as crucial, who reviewed that work, the date of the review, and how extensive that review was. It creates a clear chain of command and quality control.
A full audit trail within the audit trail.
Precisely.
So what if things aren't straightforward? Say the auditor finds information that contradicts their conclusion.
Yeah.
or there's some unusual situation?
Great question. Transparency is key there. If you find information that's inconsistent with your final conclusion on something important.
Can't just ignore it.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You must document how you address that inconsistency. How did you resolve it to reach your final conclusion?
Okay, show your thinking.
Right. And similarly, if there's an exceptional case where you need to depart from a basic principle or a standard procedure,
Like skip a required step.
well, not skip it lightly, but if you judge it necessary, you have to document how the alternative steps you took still achieved the audit goal and why you departed in the first place.
So justify the deviation.
Exactly. It encourages critical thinking and makes sure everything is out in the open.
It feels like once that final report is signed, sealed, delivered, the auditors can relax. But you're saying the work on the papers isn't quite done yet.
That's right. There's still a crucial administrative step. The auditor has to assemble the final audit file.
Assemble it.
Yeah, pull everything together into the complete official record. And this needs to be done on a timely basis after the report date.
Good.
And once that final file is assembled, you generally can't delete or discard anything before the end of the required retention period. It's locked down.
Locked in. Okay, now this is interesting. What if, despite being final, something needs to be changed or added after that assembly? That sounds tricky.
It is tricky, and it should be rare. But if modifications or additions are absolutely necessary after the final file is assembled,
Like you found an error or missed something.
could be, or new information comes to light, if changes happen, you have to document very specific things.
What things?
The specific reasons why the changes were made, and exactly when and by whom they were made and reviewed.
So another layer of audit trail.
Precisely. And this also applies if some exceptional circumstance pops up after the report date that forces you to do new procedures or reach new conclusions.
Like what? A major subsequent event.
Maybe. In that case, you document the circumstances, the new work done, the new evidence, the new conclusions, how it affects the report, and again, when and by whom the changes were made and reviewed. It ensures total transparency even for post-report adjustments.
Okay, so zooming back out again, we see the meticulousness. What does all this mean for the audit process overall? Why are these papers so important beyond just, checking regulatory boxes?
Well, they're absolute fundamental for several reasons. First, quality control. Audit firms use them for internal reviews to make sure standards are met.
Okay, internal checks.
Second, they provide assurance that work delegated to junior staff, say, has been properly done and reviewed. Vital in big teams.
Managing the team.
Right. Third, they are the tangible evidence that an effective audit happened. Builds credibility.
Proof of work.
Exactly. But beyond that, good working papers actually make the audit more economical, efficient, and effective.
How so?
Well, you're not reinventing the wheel each year. Future teams can build on past work, understand the client history. It saves time and effort.
Institutional knowledge.
Right. They contain the detailed facts justifying the conclusions. And crucially, they retain a record of things that matter year after year, continuing significance for future audits.
That makes a lot of sense. So if we could dissect a single, perfect working paper, what are its characteristics? What would we actually see?
Okay, a really good one is a model of clarity. It starts with the basics in the header.
The header.
Yeah, you need the client's name, the period end date, year ended December 31st, 2024, the subject matter being addressed.
Like cash reconciliation or something.
Exactly. A unique file reference number so you can find it easily. And then, critically, the initials or signature of the person who prepared it and the date they did it.
Okay, standard stuff.
And if it's something the client prepared, it needs to say, prepared by client, the date the auditor received it, and the initials of the auditor who checked it.
Noting the source.
Yes. And don't forget the reviewer's initials and the date of review. That quality control check is essential.
Right, the sign-offs.
Yeah.
So that's the header. What about the actual content? What makes that high quality?
The content needs to be super clear and purposeful. First, a clear audit objective. What were you trying to achieve with this specific piece of work?
Example.
Like, to ensure the completeness of trade payables. You state the goal up front.
Okay.
It needs the full period end, again, to avoid any mix-ups. Then the full extent of the test. How many items did you look at? How did you decide on that number? This shows the work was sufficient.
Not just tested some invoices.
No. Be specific. If you reference another paper, give the full reference number, not just see other paper. Make it easy to follow the trail.
No dead ends.
Right. The results must be clear, objective, unbiased, based only on the facts you documented.
Just the fact.
And the conclusion you draw must logically follow from those results and be strong enough to stand up to scrutiny from someone else.
Makes sense.
And practically, it needs that clear reference for filing. Signed by the preparer, so if there are questions later, you know who to ask, and signed and dated by the reviewer for quality control.
So it sounds like a self-contained story almost. Objective, test, results, conclusion, who did what when.
That's a good way to put it, self-contained and verifiable.
And what if that reviewer, doing their check, finds something wrong? A mistake or something's missing?
That generates what's called an audit review point.
A review point?
Yeah, it's basically a flag. It means the person who prepared the paper has to go back, fix the error, or add the missing information. It's part of that quality loop.
A feedback mechanism built right in.
Exactly. Ensures the final paper is up to standard before the file is locked down.
Okay, one more area. What about documents the client's own staff prepare? Can auditors just grab those and stick them in the file?
They can definitely use client-prepared schedules and analyses. It's often efficient.
Saves duplicating effort.
Right. But you need to plan it. Agree with the client early on what form these papers will take. Get it in the audit timetable.
Okay.
And they must be clearly marked prepared by client or PBC. That label is non-negotiable.
So everyone knows the origin.
Yes. But here's the key step. The auditor responsible for that specific area still has to sign that PBC paper.
Sign it. Why?
That signature signifies that the auditor has checked it, reviewed it, essentially audited the client's schedule, and is taking responsibility for it as part of their audit evidence.
So it's not just accepting it blindly, it's adopting it after checking.
Precisely. It becomes part of the firm's audited evidence, even though the client initially prepared it.
Wow. Okay, what a deep dive, truly, into these working papers. It's really clear they're not just, back office admin.
Not at all.
They're the detailed, documented proof that underpins the whole credibility of an audit, aren't they?
They really are. They're the story of the audit, step by step, decision by decision.
Verifiable.
Absolutely verifiable. And when they're done right with care, with skill, they are the proof that the audit was effective, efficient, and even economic.
Yeah.
The goal really is that completeness, that clarity, so that stranger, that experienced auditor with no prior connection.
The stranger test again.
Yeah, they can pick it up and understand exactly what work was done, why it was done, what was found, and how the conclusions were reached. It's about leaving that undeniable, transparent trail.
A really powerful concept. So here's a final thought for you listening. We've seen this extreme level of detailed, verifiable documentation in auditing. It's built for trust and accountability. How does that level of rigor compare to how you document your own important decisions or your knowledge in maybe other parts of your life or your work?
Mm-hmm.
Are there lessons we can take from audit working papers, maybe about building our own systems, personal or professional, that ensure clarity, accountability, and understanding, even for a stranger? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.